The corridors whispered long before I heard the first clang. Dust drifted like breath over the iron bars, each mote caught in the amber beam of my flashlight. The prison's air was still, so thick with silence it felt alive, like it was listening. I'd come here to prove that the stories were only echoes, that darkness couldn't remember faces or names. But standing in that hallway, I could feel the weight of history pressing down, ancient and restless. My flashlight trembled. A weak blade against endless shadow. Somewhere behind me a hinge moaned, followed by a shiver of cold air brushing past my neck. My breath caught midair, visible, fragile. I turned toward the sound, heart pounding loud enough to fill the silence, realizing too late that I wasn't the one moving first. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became, as if the building were slowly remembering itself. The concrete walls glistened with condensation, the smell of iron and rain seeping from every crack. I whispered to the recorder that I felt watched, but the playback hissed like static laughter. My flashlight beam quivered over graffiti. Names, years, numbers scratched in desperate repetition. My footsteps no longer belonged only to me. There was rhythm in the echo that followed, just offbeat enough to belong to someone else. Each corridor turned inward, pulling me deeper, past the point where sound itself began to distort into a kind of low human hum. The dark wasn't empty. It was attentive. The cell block opened up like a wound, 2 tiers of rusted metal and hollow air. Every door stood either half-closed or wide, like mouths frozen mid-scream. My boots clicked, echoing unevenly, as though something unseen matched my steps out of sync. I lifted the flashlight toward the far wall where hundreds of names were carved deep, layered over one another, until they formed an unreadable scar. The recorder popped once, then fell silent. For a heartbeat, the only sound was my pulse. Then came a breath. Soft, measured, impossibly near. From behind the bars, I told myself it was the wind. The lie didn't hold. I set my tripod down at the block's center, trying to anchor myself in the ritual of documentation. The camera's red light blinked faithfully, the only constant in the growing unease. My voice filled the hollow room, measured, rehearsed, but each echo returned softer, changed. The low hum I'd heard before thickened into something that vibrated through the walls, the floor, even my ribs. A cell door creaked open at the far end, its sound long, deliberate, knowing. I turned slowly, flashlight trembling, beam catching empty space. The open door waited. The air around it pulsed like breath. My watch read 3:30 a.m. The hum had quieted into something worse, anticipation. I turned off the flashlight and sat near the open cell, camera still rolling, eyes straining against the dark. 3 minutes felt like hours. When the second hand struck 3:33, the first door slammed shut. Then another, then another. The sound built into a rolling thunder of iron and air, shaking dust from the ceiling. I could feel the vibrations in my bones, each slam perfectly timed, orchestrated, I shouted, but the noise swallowed my voice. When silence returned, the camera was still recording, but all the doors were sealed. When the final echo faded, the silence that followed felt alive. I stood motionless, waiting for something, anything, to move again. The red light of my camera blinked faithfully in the dark, a tiny pulse marking time where time shouldn't exist. I whispered into the lens, asking if anyone else heard it, though I already knew the answer. The air had thickened. Each breath burned cold against my throat. I tried the first door, but it didn't budge. Metal on metal. Unyielding. Panic rose like static, creeping under my skin. Then from the end of the hall came a single sound. A tap, deliberate and slow, like a knuckle against iron. It repeated 3 times, each louder than the last. I called out, my voice cracking against the concrete. The sound traveled down the corridor, dissolving into 100 ghostly echoes that returned in whispers. For a fleeting second, I thought I heard laughter, a faint, rasping chuckle woven into the static. I turned in circles, flashlight beam, carving arcs through the darkness, but nothing moved. The tapping came again, this time from the opposite direction. My heart raced as I realized it wasn't echoing, it was answering. The entire corridor seemed to tilt under the weight of that realization, the air vibrating with unseen presence. I gripped the camera tight, forcing my shaking hands to keep recording. The air changed, as if something massive had drawn near. No footsteps, no breath, just a shift. My flashlight dimmed, the batteries dying despite being fresh. I caught a flicker of movement in the reflection of the metal bars, something human-shaped, standing where I'd just been. I spun, beam cutting through nothing. My camera clicked from its tripod, the autofocus hunting in the dark, then stopped on a cell. The door creaked open an inch on its own, hinges shrieking like a long, angry memory. I felt the pull, not physical, but something deeper, drawing me closer. I took a step, then another. Inside the cell, the temperature dropped instantly. My breath turned white, curling into shapes that didn't dissipate. They lingered, twisting like smoke. The walls were covered in scratches and words, too many to read, etched deep by desperate hands. I aimed the flashlight upward, its beam revealing something carved into the ceiling. We never left. The words looked fresh, the grooves still clean. I stumbled back, hitting the metal frame hard enough to rattle the bars. Behind me, a low voice whispered my name. Not loud, not even close, but right beside my ear. I stumbled into the hall, gasping, the echo of my name still coiled in my ears. The camera had fallen, lens cracked, the red light still blinking like an open eye on the floor. The tapping had stopped, replaced by something worse. A low rhythmic thud, steady, mechanical, almost like a heartbeat deep in the walls. I followed it, drawn by dread and curiosity in equal measure. The sound led to the old control room, its door half open. Inside, rows of rusted monitors flickered to life one by one. Static, forming images, corridors, cells, shadows that moved when I didn't. On one screen, I saw myself standing at the threshold, staring back. The static rolled like ocean waves, filling the room with electric breath. Each screen blinked with fractured images. The hallways, the cells, even the stairwell I'd just climbed, but nothing aligned. Every feed lagged by a second, as if the building were replaying me. I leaned closer, searching for pattern in the chaos, when one monitor steadied. It showed a corridor bathed in faint orange light. My corridor. The camera panned slowly, though my tripod sat broken behind me. Then, in perfect silence, a figure crossed the frame. It moved like me, wore my clothes, carried my flashlight, but its face was wrong. I could see its mouth moving, whispering something I couldn't hear, and I realized it wasn't the camera that was watching me. I reached for the screen instinctively, pressing my hand against its flickering surface. Static hissed up my arm, sharp and stinging. The image trembled, and for a split second, the reflection on the glass wasn't mine. It smiled. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair that clattered against the tiled floor, breaking the silence. The other monitors flared white, then black, leaving only one lit. On it, the figure stood motionless in the hallway, head tilted slightly, listening. My name, barely audible this time, seeped through the static, drawn out like a breath, dragged through rusted wire. I unplugged the power, but the screen stayed on. I ran from the control room, boots slamming against wet concrete. The cell block's hum had grown louder, no longer mechanical but alive, like the deep drone of 100 unseen voices. My flashlight beam swung wildly as I passed the cells. The doors now stood open, all of them. The air carried a new sound, a slow dragging, like chains pulled across stone. I didn't want to look, but something inside me demanded it. I turned the beam toward the sound and froze. At the end of the hall, the figure stood, watching. The same stance, the same clothes, the same flashlight, but its light was aimed directly at me. I stopped moving. The figure raised its hand, slowly, deliberately, mirroring mine. Every movement it made was a reflection, perfect and wrong. I shouted into the corridor, demanding it stop, but my words came back half a second too late, in my own voice. My breath hitched, panic slicing clean through the fog of disbelief. I lifted my flashlight again, shining it directly into its face. For the briefest instant, I saw myself staring back, eyes hollow, mouth whispering something behind the sound. Then the light burst, bulb cracking with a sharp pop, plunging the hall into perfect waiting blackness. In the dark, the hum returned, deeper, closer, vibrating through every wall. I stumbled backward until my spine hit cold concrete, fumbling for my camera. Its red light still blinked faintly, steady as a heartbeat. I raised it toward the darkness where the figure had stood, whispering, "Who are you?" The answer came not in voice but movement. A dozen cell doors slamming open in sequence, metal screeching like breathless laughter. My camera shook in my hands, the lens fogging with condensation. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw faces, too many to count, pressed against the bars, watching. Then everything went still. The red light blinked once more and died. When the red light died, I knew the rules had changed. The dark no longer hid, it consumed. Every sound I made came back slower, deeper, reshaped by something that now understood me. I fumbled for my backup light, flicked it on, and saw the cell block for what it had become. Not a ruin, but a wound. Moisture dripped from the ceiling in rhythmic taps, echoing like a clock counting backward. I whispered into the dark that I wanted to leave. But the word leave didn't belong here. The corridors stretched too long, folding in directions that hadn't existed before. Somewhere deep within the structure, a low metallic moan rippled through the walls, and I realized the prison was no longer silent. It was speaking. I moved carefully, whispering to the camera as if the act of narration could anchor me to reality. My own voice sounded strange, thin, distorted, trailing off like it was being pulled from somewhere else. The walls seemed to pulse in and out of focus. Every few steps, my flashlight flickered and showed things that shouldn't be there. Shadows without bodies, bars bending and straightening like they were breathing. The air had grown warmer now, thick and wet with decay. When I finally turned a corner, I saw the old chapel door, splintered and open. Something inside shimmered in candlelight, even though I hadn't lit anything. The chapel was small, suffocating. Broken pews lay scattered across the floor, covered in soot and feathers. Dozens of melted candles flickered, despite the still air, their light bending as if drawn toward a single point: the altar. Upon it sat a cracked mirror, tall and narrow, its surface fogged but faintly glowing. I moved closer, every instinct screaming to stop. The reflection shifted before I reached it. I saw the chapel, the candles, and me. But behind me, something stood in the doorway, not moving, just there, watching. I spun around, flashlight raised, but the doorway was empty. My reflection still lingered on the mirror's surface, though my body had moved. It smiled when I didn't. My chest tightened, breath short, the sound of a heartbeat that wasn't mine thudding through the floor. The mirror's glow intensified, spreading like veins of light along the cracks. Then I heard a voice, a whisper layered with many tones, all speaking one phrase: "We've been waiting." The candles flared, stretching their flames toward the ceiling. I dropped the flashlight. For a moment, everything glowed white. When vision returned, I was no longer in the chapel. The candles, the mirror, the altar, all gone. I stood in a circular room of concrete walls slick with condensation. My camera lay on the floor, lens cracked but still recording. I could see myself in its tiny screen, breathing hard, whispering my own name like I didn't recognize it. Then the sound came again, irons slamming shut, one after another, closer each time. My reflection on the camera feed began to lag again, its mouth moving before mine. I felt heat rising from the floor, the air pulsing with energy. And then, from behind the lens, the reflection whispered. The floor pulsed beneath me like a heartbeat, slow and ancient. The walls sweated moisture that smelled of iron and something older, something alive. My breath came shallow, echoing louder than it should have. I pressed my palm to the wall, and it felt warm. The faint hum that had followed me since midnight now carried rhythm, almost music, low, deliberate, patient. I lifted the camera and found the lens fogged from my own breath. Behind the misted glass, a shape flickered just beyond focus. It moved as I did, but slower, as though dragging time behind it. I wiped the lens, and for one trembling instant, the image cleared. I was not alone. The air throbbed with an unseen pulse, vibrating through the concrete like distant thunder. I turned toward the tunnel ahead, its entrance gaping like a wound in the wall. The faint hum deepened, becoming words I couldn't fully understand, chanting low and fractured. My flashlight caught the outlines of old chains, hooks, and rusted tools abandoned on the floor. I felt drawn forward, not by curiosity, but by recognition, as though some part of me already knew the way. When I stepped into the tunnel, the walls seemed to close slightly around me. The hum behind me ceased, replaced by a long exhale that felt almost human. The tunnel led to another chamber, smaller, rounder, the air heavier than before. In the center stood a rusted chair bolted to the floor. Around it, the concrete was marked with concentric rings of old stains, dark and layered. I set the camera down facing the chair. Its red light blinked like a pulse in sync with mine. The chanting returned, closer now, a dozen overlapping whispers circling the room. My flashlight dimmed, the beam trembling, and for an instant, the chair wasn't empty. I blinked, and it was. But the air still rippled where something had been sitting. The whispers pressed in, circling tighter, their cadence matching the beating in my chest. I picked up the camera and whispered back, asking what they wanted. My voice cracked, swallowed by echoes. The red light on the device flared, then dimmed, as if responding. The room felt smaller now, shrinking around me. My reflection flickered on the cracked lens, delayed, flickering, wrong. Behind me, in that mirrored shimmer, the figure reappeared. I didn't turn. I just watched it move closer in the reflection, until its shadow fell across my shoulder. A voice, soft as breath, spoke near my ear. "You've seen us now!" The red light blinked once, then steadied into a constant glow. Every cell door in the distance began to creak open, one after another, slow and deliberate. The chanting became clearer, no longer whispers but words. "Stay with us." I stumbled back toward the tunnel, but it had closed. The wall now seamless, smooth, as if it had never existed. The air thickened, dense enough to taste. I aimed my camera at the center of the room, its lens reflecting dozens of faint outlines moving within the dark. Their faces shimmered faintly in the glow, blank, pale, waiting. I pressed record and whispered the only thing left to say. "I understand." The figures didn't move closer. They simply existed, flickering in and out of the same space I occupied. The air quivered with their presence, and for the first time, I realized they weren't separate from the prison. They were the prison, its breath, its rhythm, its memory, every brick, every hinge, Every echo carried what was left of them. I turned in slow circles, camera still recording, the red light pulsing like a heart, trying to remember how to beat. When I whispered into the lens, my voice split into half mine, half theirs. Together we said, "You stayed." The words felt heavy, final. Somewhere above, metal groaned like the earth shifting in its sleep. I walked among them, though they barely seemed aware of me. They flickered in and out of light, each movement bending space like heat distortion. The closer I looked, the more familiar their faces became. Echoes of mugshots I'd seen in the prison archives, men and women frozen in time. But their eyes weren't empty. They were remembering. I realized I was being absorbed into their recollection, swallowed by history, repeating itself. My body felt lighter, my heartbeat fading beneath the low hum of 1,000 voices merging. Every shadow clung to me, and I began to lose track of where my edges ended. I reached the far wall where the stone was different, older, darker. The camera shook in my hand, its screen now showing not the room, but something beneath it. I crouched, wiping grime away to find a door-shaped outline carved into the rock. The hinges were fused, ancient, but from behind it came a faint rhythm, steady, wet, alive. I pressed my ear to the stone. The pulse matched the prison's heartbeat. My mind flooded with images that weren't mine, faces screaming, chains breaking, water rising. The door throbbed under my touch. Then, from the other side, something knocked. 3 slow, deliberate times. The knock echoed through the entire cell block, triggering a cascade of metallic groans above. Dust fell like slow rain, and the ghosts flickered violently, their forms distorting with each vibration. I backed away from the door, the camera aimed at it, breath ragged. The red light blinked erratically now, as though the device was breathing too. I whispered into it, asking what was behind that wall. The reply didn't come from the door, but from the screen. Words appeared across the static in faint digital scrawl. The first prisoner. The lights dimmed until only those words remained visible in red reflection across my face. Something inside the wall began to move, slowly like stone dragged across stone. The chamber filled with vibration, low and resonant, enough to make my vision blur. I backed toward the corridor, but it had vanished again, sealed behind seamless concrete. The figures around me bowed their heads in unison, flickering like candle flames in a storm. A crack split the door. Thin and dark, cold air poured through, thick with dust and the faint smell of earth. I felt myself stepping forward despite every instinct screaming to stop. My camera's light flared white. The last thing I saw before everything went black was an eye, open, ancient, and watching. When the light cleared, I wasn't underground anymore. The corridor stretched endlessly before me, pristine and new, as though the prison had been rebuilt overnight. The walls were smooth, the air sharp with antiseptic. My camera still hung from my hand, but its light had gone out. I walked, my footsteps echoing perfectly, without delay. For a moment I thought I'd escaped the rot and the whispers. But then I noticed every cell door stood open, each one containing a figure standing still, silent, waiting. Their eyes followed me as I passed. None spoke, none moved. The hallway turned back on itself in impossible geometry, looping endlessly until I understood. I was still inside. The silence pressed like a physical weight. I called out, but the sound died instantly, absorbed by something unseen. The prisoners' faces began to change, details fading, melting away until each became a pale outline of a human shape. The corridor lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed to a dull amber glow. I aimed the camera toward them, and the display sputtered back to life, revealing what my eyes could not. Movement. The outlines were walking, slowly, rhythmically, toward me, not with hostility but with intent. The camera shook as I whispered, "What do you want?" The answer scrawled itself across the viewfinder. To remember, they surrounded me, forming a slow-moving circle, their outlines wavering like candlelight in wind. I could feel their gaze, heavy and ancient, not judging, simply witnessing. The hum rose again, not as a threat but a song, something vast and wordless. Images flashed in my mind. Riots, isolation, silence, despair. The history of the prison lived within them, every scream and prayer echoing across time. One of the shapes stepped closer, its hand faintly visible, reaching toward my chest. The touch was cold, but not cruel. I understood then. They weren't keeping me here. They were asking me to see, to carry what they could no longer speak. I felt something enter me. Not possession, not pain, but memory. A flood of moments I'd never lived poured through my veins like smoke and fire. I saw the walls being built, the first prisoner chained, the last one buried. I saw decades of hopelessness compressed into seconds. When I opened my eyes, the corridor was empty again, my breath fogged in the cold air. The camera hung at my side, its light steady and white now, no longer red. On its cracked screen, a new image shimmered. The outside world, dawn breaking over the prison yard, a door waiting open in the morning fog. I walked toward that light, the weight of silence following like an echo that refused to die. When I reached the end of the hall, the real door stood open, sunlight spilling across the threshold. I hesitated, knowing if I stepped through, I'd take the prison with me. Not its walls, but its memory. I crossed anyway. The air outside was clean, real, alive. My camera recorded until the battery drained. The final image, a freeze frame of empty corridors behind me. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the doors inside slammed once more, sealing whatever remained within. I didn't look back. But even now, when I close my eyes, I still hear the hum, steady, patient, waiting for me to return.